Okay. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the March 22nd meeting of the Auburn School Committee. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let's start with introductions down here to my right, please.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Brian Belknap, Ward 4.
Karen Matthew, Ward 3.
Connie Brown, Superintendent.
Pat Gaudier at large.
Pamela Albert at large.
Jason Lebeck, Mayor.
Abigail Fauché, Student Representative.
Gabriel Esperdel, Student Representative.
Sue Doris, Assistant Superintendent.
Mark Conrad, Business Manager.
All right, thank you. Ward 1 Rep. Clarissa Perez-Amardez has a excused absence for this evening. Pam Hart, Ward 2, will be joining us as very shortly. All right, let's begin with a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Do I have a second?
So moved.
Thank you, Pat. Questions, comments? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Let's open up to public participation at this time. Do you have anyone from the public who would like to come address the school committee? 1, 2, 3. Seeing none, I'll close public participation. All right. We are here tonight for the bulk of the evening budget presentation. So without further ado, we are going to hear from Cost Center 10, I believe. All right, Dr. Brown.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conrad, I think you are up for debt service.
Thank you. So we've talked a bit about debt service over the last few years because of the increases each year as debt comes on board for the new high school. So we have 2 bonds for the high school, and we're 3/4 of the way towards absorbing the increases in debt into our operating budget. So currently, we've budgeted the principal and interest payment on the first bond and the interest payments on the second bond. Next year, the principal payment for the second bond will also kick in. So you'll see a net increase of somewhat over $2.4 million. But then after that, your debt will start to decline as your interest payments go down and your principal payments stay even. In fiscal year 27, it actually goes down quite a bit because we've paid off the addition to Park Avenue Elementary School. I would note this is will probably be somewhat out of date if the referendum passes with the almost $4.6 million bond that's been approved moving forward by the state board, is in process with the city council. But that bond represents less than 5% of the total bonding costs for the high school. So it will move the needle a little bit in terms of our costs. It will not have an impact on the local share, as we've said before, because it will be 100% state supported. This slide we actually showed you in November when we had our budget workshop with you. This is the state portion of debt service. So as a reminder, the state is picking up 88% of the debt service for the new high school. We're picking up locally 12% based on some of the features we wanted to have added into the high school, and that was a separate referendum question that was approved. So the most significant impact for that is we're going to have to increase our local share by $293,000. So that's one of the stressors, I think, is a fair statement to say in the coming budget year. And then again, after that, it starts to decline. So any questions on debt service?
Do we have any questions for Mr. Conrad? Seeing none, Mark.
Now we're on to adult education.
Thank you, Mark.
So it's my pleasure to introduce Jen Tyner. Come on up, Jen. She is the Director for Adult Education in both Lewiston and Auburn, and she will present the Auburn portion of the budget. Welcome. It's nice to see you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. Thank everybody for taking some time to allow me to come and talk with you about adult education programming tonight. I want to talk and share with you our mission statement as the first slide. So in adult education, we obviously are focused on lifelong learning and helping adult learners to meet their goals. We think about adult education programming in 3 kind of categories. So academic programming, workforce, and enrichment or community education. Our academic programming includes a wide array of programs, including English language instruction for multilingual learners, adult basic education for learners who are functioning at a level below a high school level, and then we help our learners to work their way up through high school preparation. And we have 2 distinct pathways for that, including our HiSET programming, which for those of you, is still kind of known out in the community as the GED. It hasn't been the GED for quite a few years, but it's now called the HiSET. It's the same equivalency credential. We offer a fairly robust diploma program. And then we also have incorporated in the past 5 years our Maine College and Career Access programming. And that programming allows us to work with high school completion students or students who are co-enrolled in high school completion who are looking to go on to either a 2-year, 4-year, or a short-term training program in a sector. Right? So we can also help our academic students make that jump to whatever comes next after high school. So we are really looking to leverage our resources for the entire community. In our workforce programming this year has really focused in healthcare pathways. And so that's been one particular area of focus, and I'll be talking shortly about some new areas that we'll be exploring starting next year. And of course, everybody knows enrichment, right? So our enrollments, I wanted to help to kind of show you and compare what our enrollments were from last year to this year. It's important to note that in adult education, enrollment is really a snapshot in time. It varies, it can vary greatly depending on a lot of factors, but including the state of the economy, because what we do find is that if the economy turns down, usually our enrollments turn up because people are looking to get help going back to work. So you can see that last year we had 235 students enrolled in our diploma pathways. That included both adult diploma and HiSET. I gave you the breakdown there. And if you compare now to a snapshot as of March 10th, you can see that we have 57 anticipated graduates this year, 26 currently in HiSET, 31 in diploma. And then if you kind of can compare going down for adult basic education, last year was 34. This year we have 59. And those are students that are functioning at a below a high school level. So that can be anything from, you know, real foundational literacy skills all the way up through what we would call like a middle school level. Our English as a second language or our multilingual language programming is grown quite a bit this year. So last year we had 17 enrollments in ESOL, and this year we have 32. We have actually, Auburn is one of the resettlement sites for a lot of our new Ukraine immigrants. And we are seeing that we have quite a few of those folks who have joined our adult education programming here in Auburn. And our enrollments right now for workforce are at 43, although again, it's only March, and we will continue to add to those numbers throughout the rest of this fiscal year. And our enrichment numbers have grown and have creeped up a little bit this year too, where we're at 181. For our structure, we are located primarily at Edward Little High School. During the evenings is where we do the bulk of our programming. But we also have a classroom site inside of central office where Juliet is able to provide a lot of our ELL through ABE and HiSET programming during the day. We do have the High Street Congregational Church has provided us with a language classroom during the day, a couple days a week, so that we can provide a little bit larger classroom for English language learners. And we leverage some sites over in Lewiston currently for the workforce programming that we're doing during the daytime, so that we can credential CNAs and do research for CNAs. There's a shared director between Lewiston and Auburn, as you know, so the split is 65-35, and that really has been helpful in terms of looking at the programming as a whole within the two communities and being able to leverage opportunities between the two communities. We have 3 full-time staff. So we have our academic counselor and assistant director. We have our ABE and ELL instructor coordinator at central office, and we have 1 secretary, an admin assistant, who does also the bulk of our data entry and tracking of data, as well as working on our community education brochure. And then on top of that, we have roughly 25 part-time employees, a lot of whom are people who already work for Auburn schools, who teach for us in the evening doing adult diploma or high set preparation and enrichment classes. To get into the funding a little bit, I wanted to share with you first, if we look at revenue, I've given you the breakdown of the revenue structure for this upcoming year in comparison to some past years. So you can see here that this year we were looking at a slight reduction in our state subsidy, and we, in turn, were asking for that reduction into the local share. We have also included what we were anticipating for tuition and fees. The tuition and fees aspect of our programming really comes from two sources. That's what could come from workforce development as well as enrichment. There's no tuition for academic programming and adult education. And we really looked at those numbers since I've come into the adult education program with Mark, and thought we should try to do a little bit better job with transparency and making those numbers look a little more accurate to what we were actually bringing in for tuition. So you see that we have reduced that a little bit because we know at this point we have not historically been bringing in that much for tuition over time. So we wanted that to be a little bit more accurate for budgeting purposes. Is that the same? Okay. Oh, what happened to the rest? Oh, my slides are missing. Yeah. I'm missing some slides. I will talk through them. How's that? I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. So we wanted to also share with you the expenditure side of the flip of the revenue, which is expenditures. So this year we're looking at, or this coming year, we're looking at salary increases of about 3% and a 15% health insurance increase, which brings our total salaries to $237,740 with benefits at $35,709. And then all the other aspects of programming expenditures would come in at $68,298. That's a total of $341,747. That's the primary concern for the warrant for this upcoming budget year. But I also wanted to share with you some additional funding that we receive in adult education, because on top of the local contribution and the state subsidy and tuition, we also have some grant funding that we rely on pretty heavily to supplement the programming that we're able to provide in adult education. One of those grants is our Adult Education and Family Literacy Grant, or our AFLA grant. That grant will continue next year. It's in its last year for continuation. It will be RFP'd next year, so we know we have guaranteed funding in AFLA for next year. That provides a lot of our basic literacy instruction and English language instruction, all the way up through what would be called our high school completion level. We have guaranteed funding from our Community Development Block Grant, which we have received from the city. That grant we're currently using to address student barriers, including transportation and language access. So we have a really strong partnership right now with LA Cab, who is allowing us to leverage their services to transport our students to and from school. As you know, the city bus link doesn't provide transportation in the evening. So we've been able to partner with them. They upfront the cost of those services, and then we leverage our grant funding to pay that monthly for the school, for the students who need transportation to and from school. We're hoping that continues. We've had quite robust funding from the city for that. And then the MCCA grant, which is the one I talked about for the college and career access, that grant actually ends this year, so there will be a new RFP for that grant. It should come out any time. I'm expecting it to come out in the next couple of weeks. So I could not put that figure into what we would receive for grant funds for this year because it's not guaranteed funding, but I'm anticipating that we will receive it, at least to some degree. And so that gives us a total of $28,450 additional that's guaranteed for next year in grant funds. And then, of course, we will be applying for additional funding through MCCA. And then great news, one of the grants, for those of you who are familiar, we have a hub structure in our adult education throughout the state. So Lewiston and Auburn are part of Hub 6, which includes all of the adult education programs within Androscoggin and Oxford County. We work together on grant applications. And so we applied for the Strengthening Maine's Workforce Grant, which is a grant that will be funded up to $200,000 to do an expansion of workforce development and CTE type programming for adult learners, leveraging the new CTE site inside of the new EL high school. So we're very excited about that. And we did actually get notification this week that we have received that grant. So we may not get the full $200,000, but it's going to be pretty close. So I'm really excited because that's going to allow us to develop some new programming. And that programming is really targeted towards hospitality and culinary, manufacturing, and additional healthcare pathways for adult learners. And in addition to that, we also just make a statement every year that adult education does help to contribute to the general purpose aid through reimbursement for 16 to 20-year-old programming, 16 to 20-year-old students who participate in adult education. And this coming year's estimate is at $87,757. For goals, we're really looking to expand our English language instruction for multilingual learners in Auburn. Our enrollment has doubled, and I am anticipating, based on the state advisory groups that I'm on, that we're going to see even more newcomers to Auburn. And we've already added some additional coursework in the evening, one night a week, and we're looking to expand that to 2 nights a week. And we've had a couple of requests from local businesses to see if we can provide some on-site English language instruction for folks, adults who are working, who are struggling with comprehension on the job. And so I'm in some conversations with some employers around that. We're going to increase our workforce training opportunities for adults in Auburn, as now we know we have received the Strengthening Maine Workforce Grant, so there is some funding to do that. And that, of course, will help us to also hopefully bring in some additional tuition to the programming and to credential some adults to go to work, which is one of the large priorities of our programs. We want to continue to develop courses to assist our youth, connections to workforce and to life skills. And so this year, we have worked to incorporate MCCA programming for all of our high set and adult diploma students. So we believe that all students should be ready when they gain their high school credential to go on to either a 2-year, 4-year, or some kind of short-term training program. So we have incorporated that into all aspects of our academic programming. We are doing career pathways planning with all of our students so that they have some understanding of goals of what they might like to do once they complete their academic programming. And we have worked with Strengthen LA to provide some transportation and case management for adults who are looking for some supports to help them get to work. We have one instructor that's an MCCA instructor that's been shared between Lewiston and Auburn. We have a second one also in Auburn, but there's one that's shared between the two. And this year, I've been working with USM LAC to see if we can provide some on-site college transitions programming at USM LAC. We have done that similarly in the past at Central Maine Community College. Unfortunately, at this point in time, they don't have a lot of space for us because they're really, really full. So we wanted to be able to look at some other post-secondary opportunities. And USMLAC also houses UMA, which is another great connecting point for adult non-traditional learners. And of course, we're looking to always increase our adult basic education and enrichment opportunities. So if anybody wants to teach a class, contact me. Are there any questions?
Do you have any questions for Jen? Thank you, Jen. That was a great presentation. And we do have the slides that you are missing. I believe we have that as part of the slides you weren't able to show. I believe we have here as part of our
Right.
onboarding packet tonight. So Any questions for Jen?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none. Nice job. Thank you very much. All right, so school committee members, that brings us to, we have, I believe, Dr. Brown, correct me if I'm wrong, but have we gone through all 10 of our, we've gone through all our cost centers at this point?
We have, with the exception of the crossing guards. Mark, do we have a slide on crossing guards? I don't think so.
No, I think that's just changing a little bit because their workers' comp insurance has gone down.
A little bit. But we do need to talk with you about revenue. So Mark, would you pop up the revenue
Yes.
slides?
This first slide is revenue for adult education, and Jen has already talked about this. I did want to make one observation. Jen has worked really hard to contain costs within the program, because if you look at the proposed increase in the local assessment, it only offsets the loss of funds and state subsidy. So she's really worked to essentially keep the budget level from where it was last year. So here we have a summary of our total revenue operating budget. The bottom line is driven by what our costs are, and that $58.6 million is outside of adult education. We have additional slides for state subsidy, local assessment, and fund balance, so I'll skip those for a moment. There are two other lines I just want to comment on. You have one line which is other, which is really a catch-all for various sources of revenue, including main care, state agency clients, gate receipts, miscellaneous revenue. It also included a line for rental from RETC for the Lake Street building, and that was $58,000 this year and has been $58,000. We established a separate special revenue fund for that as a regional program, and then all three districts paid into that through tuition charges, and a piece of that was also a rental payment to the district. Now that it's no longer a regional program next year, we're just picking up the cost directly in our operating budget, and they've gone down as we've downsized the program. But we've also lost that revenue of $58,000, and hence you have the decline of $49,500 on that revenue line. And that was anticipated as we looked at our financial modeling to say it essentially would be a break even or a little bit of a gain from overall costs on the program. You also have a line for naming rights. You may recall we received $400,000 for the naming rights to the Performing Arts Center for the new high school. And the school committee has said that, and the fundraising committee has said that any funds raised for naming rights would be used for tax relief, which was a promise to the voters. And so we're proposing $200,000 of that $400,000 be utilized next year. That will offset a good chunk of the increase in the local share on the debt service on Edward Little High School, which is exactly what it was intended to do. And then we would propose stepping it down over the next 2 years, so we avoid that revenue clip that we sometimes talk about. This slide is our state subsidy. If you just look at the bottom line, it looks pretty good, $953,000 increase. But if you look between those two lines, your debt service is going up $2.1 million to offset the increase in debt service we talked about a few minutes ago. And your general subsidy is declining by $1.174 million. I want to make a point on why that's occurring, and we've talked about this before. So if you look at the report that's called the ED 279 from the DOE, it basically lays out what's driving the bottom line on our subsidy. So we have a small decline in enrollment, but it's offset by an increase in per pupil costs that have been provided through the formula. So the cost of an adequate education has gone up a little bit. What's really driving that decrease is in what's expected of this community in the formula to provide as a local share, because the state has increased the mill rate a little bit and our state valuation has really increased. The mill rate has gone up about 2.6%, and that's a uniform mill rate they apply across every community in determining what they need to match in the funding formula. 2/3 of that decline is a result of increased valuation. And it's a state valuation number, it's a 3-year average, but from last year to this year, the state valuation for Auburn is going up 4%, which is well above the state average. So that's really the driver for the decline in the general subsidy. I think we should note too, this is going to continue to happen as our assessed value goes up every year beyond the state average. This is going to be a running story, I think, for coming years. And it's not only Auburn, it's other communities in the southern part of Maine that are increasing faster than the state average. And here we have our local assessment increase, which is really, this is essentially what you need to raise for the local tax rate. So as you can see, the increase in the minimum required, which is the match we have to provide in the formula, is increasing by $1,077,000. That almost equates to the loss in state subsidy. So you're making up the difference in the formula through that. Of course, we've talked about the increase in our local-only debt service, and the additional local is additional funds we raise beyond what's required in the formula. And that's going up a little bit. I think we need to make the point that there are two sides to the conversation we just had, talked about relative to the increase in valuation. So we're losing money because our valuation is going up. But we're also increasing tax capacity because our valuation is going up. I just don't want that lost in the conversation. So here's what I mean by that. If your valuation is going up, your local valuation in this case, different from this way the state values property, if your local valuation is going up, you can raise additional dollars with the same tax rate. Not talking revaluation, talking real property increases, new property coming on the tax rolls, improved property coming on the tax rolls. And I say that because it's significant. So when we talk about what it costs if you own a $150,000 home next year with the increase in our budget, we're basing that on the current local valuation as provided by Jill Eastman, our Chief Financial Officer. That number will be updated through the City Council process in establishing tax bills for next year. If we look at the number that Jill gave me last year at this time in the budget process compared to the number she gave me for this year, it went up 10%. So there is some capability of increasing revenue for on both the city and the school side at the current tax rate. And so in this equation, I think there's really three factors. There's the loss of school funding, then there's the increase in funding you can gain within the same tax rate, and then there's the additional funding you may be asking for at a higher tax rate. So I don't want to only have a one-sided conversation to say we're just simply losing money for the state. We're also increasing the ability, our tax capacity, as your local valuation goes up because you're adding real property onto the tax rolls. Does that make sense? And finally, we've talked about the use of fund balance. I would note we had given a rough number of $6 million at the workshop the other night with the City Council. We actually have a $7 million fund balance projected. And we just have a rough projection of a $2 million surplus this year. You have a document in your budget book where we provide a proposed way of looking at stepping it down over time, and that has to be evaluated and readjusted every year as you have a year-end surplus. The other item I would note, and it doesn't appear anywhere else in the budget presentation, but we are recommending, the superintendent is recommending that you transfer an additional $250,000 into reserves. As you may recall, last year, you recommended and the City Council approved establishing a reserve for technology equipment and a reserve for maintenance of the new Edward Little High School. And in fact, you approved $125,000 from last year's surplus into each of those funds. For the second year now, we would like to propose an additional $125,000 into each of those funds with the year-end surplus. So that's part of the superintendent's budget recommendation. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yep, Pam?
You talked about the Lake Street School. Are we still going to be paying on the Lake Street School if the program is done and we've?
No, you've approved turning it back to the city as surplus property at June 30th. It'll take us a little bit longer than that to get all the furniture and equipment out, but essentially, then any costs will be borne through the city as they'll be maintaining the property.
Any other questions for Mark? Pat?
Almost $7 million is left in the fund balance.
Yes,
That's an awful lot of money.
A lot of that came from last year, and what has really occurred in the last few years is with the pandemic. 2 years ago, you had the closure of schools in March, which saved a lot of money in different ways, and then you've had all of these vacancies. It's created surpluses that have carried through into the fund balance, and I don't think we're the only district in that position. I think the reduction of the 23.5 positions for next year is actually the beginning of a process of looking at all of those vacant positions and saying, along with enrollment declines, which have come in part with the pandemic, and saying, we're going to eliminate some of those positions we haven't been able to fill. So you should see that surplus reduced in future years. But it is going to be quite high this year, and it was the last 2 years.
So, Pat, if I might, in your book is a proposed fund balance drawdown over the next several years, and it's under the revenue tab. It's about 2 or 3 pages in.
Just as having budgeted for many years in a district this size, and I think Dr. Brown can probably attest to this too, when you were creating a budget as a business manager or superintendent in October, November, December, you might have 4 or 5 positions open. You might have 1 teaching position you couldn't fill and 3 or 4 ed tech positions. And I think last year when I was doing this, we had 30 or 40 positions we couldn't fill. And so it's really been significant. And you're seeing the fiscal side of that, recognizing that it's also come at a cost in the difficulties and what our staff have had to take on, and school staff across the state and the country at this point.
Jason?
Yeah, just on fund balance again, we found it, and I just looked at it quickly, so I apologize if I missed this, but I'm not seeing, I'm seeing your drawdown of the existing fund balance. I'm not seeing any anticipated add-ins. Now granted, I know you cut the positions that are unfilled. That's a huge contributor. Do you anticipate what a healthy addition to your fund balance would be on an annual basis?
So for next year, we proposed $2 million, but it's just really difficult to know what your surpluses might be beyond that.
So you're projecting a $2 million surplus or your drawdown of $2 million? That's what
No, if you look at that sheet that's in your book, you'll see the unaudited fund balance plus an additional $2 million, less what we've proposed using from it this year. And I think that $2 million may even be low. But to your point, what it does state that it doesn't include any additional assumptions of year-end surpluses, which we know you have every year. So it is I'd say a conservative projection. It's more likely we're going to have more fund balance over time than what that is showing. I think that's fair.
In other words, you're not planning on running that down to zero.
We're not planning on running that down to zero.
So we do have on the municipal side, which it's a memorandum that covers what the city should have as a combined amount of fund balance. And that shouldn't equal more than 13% of our total municipal and school budget, which we're far in excess of that amount of the municipal side alone, not including this. Including this, we're probably closer to 25% within our combined fund balances, though they are accounted for separately.
And I suspect the municipality has had the same difficulties we have, we know, in hiring, and there are some of the same reasons they probably had.
Our financial department has been very, very good at squirreling away here and there and building that up. So we're in a very good, I think the bottom line is we're in an extremely good fiscal position if anything bad would happen. It's a rainy day fund. So just on the municipal side, we have, more than our policy, requires as a minimum. So I don't think if we're all thinking that we're going to be drawing down that school side fund balance to an unhealthy level, we still have plenty by memorandum within the municipality to cover anything. A couple questions, if I could, though. That's okay, unless anyone.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so we're looking at revenue stream, and on Monday night, I just want to get some consistency because I didn't quite see it there. We're talking about an overall increase on the levy, or the local share, about 1.7% overall, just when you exclude your debt service, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so when we exclude the debt service, that debt service, that's tied into the high school local option that was voted on. So when we pulled that out, this budget, again, bottom line to the residents of Auburn, is a 1.7% increase in education funding.
That's correct.
Okay.
And if I might, just to add to that, that does not include the increase, if you wanted to further bring the 1.7 down, $270,000 of that is electricity. I've also had to budget for another 2.5 custodians. So if I could silo the costs for the new EL, we would be very close to zero.
And Karen, I'm sorry, or Chairman, about the revenue increase, and Mark's absolutely correct on that, right? The valuation of Auburn has gone up. Every Southern Maine municipality is in the same position we're in. We were fortunate because we have such a huge tangible goods sales base in Auburn. We had an increase in our municipal rev share from the state of around $730,000. Most other communities in Southern Maine saw flat or decrease. Biddeford, Saco, significant decreases on the municipal side, but everyone is talking about, and I have a meeting in Augusta tomorrow about this, everybody's seen a massive drop off in educational funding. Now, we're wondering if this money was appropriated in the last budget, and now they're not giving out nearly as much as they were appropriated. Where is this excess of money going? We don't think it's going to Rangeley.
I could just add to that.
And
So
Lisbon.
it can be argued some of that's coming from a decline in enrollment statewide, but what struck me was that increase in the mill rate. So they apply a uniform mill rate to your state valuation, which is supposed to be comparable one community to the next. They have a formula for evening it out based on different metrics. But it struck me that they went from 7.1 to 7.29, which essentially is saying they expect a larger effort for whatever your evaluation is. So one of the questions I would have is why did they feel it necessary to increase that mill rate from 7.1 to 7.29 in the formula?
Well, simple. I mean, it's been going on for 30 years that the state government tries to shortchange and push down expenses on the local municipalities. It has always flowed downhill. Most recently, 2008, 2009, that was a huge hit for municipal government and schools, and it's gone on. So that's what they do.
Right. Any other questions regarding Mark and revenue? Or any other questions in general? All right, so at this point, Dr. Brown, does that conclude your complete budget presentation?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so therefore, school committee members, I'm going to open it up to you for discussion on what are your thoughts going forward with the budget that has been presented over the last several weeks? Thoughts on where some cuts have been recommended, or some general thoughts in general? Yes, Pat?
I have two areas that I'd like to talk about.
Yep.
The first one involves the athletics. 34,000, I think, was the total.
Mhm. Yep.
And there are 5 transportation jobs being held vacant. If one of those for 34,000 was not held vacant, we could pay for the athletics. Just an idea.
Mhm.
The second thing, and I spoke to Connie on Monday night, and I have a concern about cutting the gym teacher, health phys ed teacher at the high school, because to me, it speaks of cutting programs that provide electives for kids. And I just talked to Scott, and I think has something to say about that, right? If he can come up.
Does this position come from, it's a retirement, we're not replacing?
It's a retirement, so
Okay.
they're cutting the position.
Okay.
I feel comfortable with what Scott told me, but I think you might want to hear about the number of electives that they do have, if you want to take the time.
Yeah, I think all information is important. Scott, you've been summoned to the microphone, my friend.
Well, thank you. I did try to put some numbers together. I worked with, actually, I summoned Mary Beth Galway to try to craft these things together. But just
A lot
to
of
try
summoning
to,
going on.
well, it's a team effort, areas of expertise. So we have 161 total classes that we offer, and that does not include LRTC offerings or special ed or ELL. And we excluded the special ed and ELL because those are direct placement courses. They're not necessarily sign-ups. So out of that 161 total courses, 102 would be considered electives. And there's a trick to that because both Brian and I could be enrolled in the same class. He's using it as a requirement. I'm using it as an elective based on how our high school pathway is laid out. You can see that in math, you can see it in science, and as well as in social studies. So that it gets difficult to try to tease those out, but we did calculate what we would consider just putting into these straight electives. And so we calculated the things that weren't in the 4 core, which are math, science, social studies, and English. And that's how we got to that 102. And so looking at phys ed, we have 3 required classes and 2 electives. Now we carry 5 electives on the books. We only had enrollment for 2 of those courses. And how did we reach that decision? It was twofold. One, we know that we have a new building with new possibilities that are opening up there. Currently, we have 1 gym, and we would have the track. Now we will have the track. The tennis courts will be coming back soon, as well as we have 2 gyms. And usually where we see the pressure on phys ed classes is trying to run a combined 9th and 10th grade in one area. This gives us the capacity to be able to pull those apart, as well as the new fitness center. So when we looked at that, we have that, and then we also looked at the enrollment numbers for those electives, and those enrollment numbers were way down. They were hovering right around the 8 per class, and I don't die on that hill of that number, but they were a very, very low average, which made us wonder, are there some opportunities for some of those elective classes to be combined together? Now, some of them grow, and some of them are small. But just looking over the numbers and what the averages were, it made it an opportunity to look at that, knowing that 1, we're going to have 2 gyms and the track and field area, as well as the tennis courts coming back online, which gives us the opportunity to spread out. Because one of the big drivers about enrollment for the health and phys ed classes is the safety and having the ability to move around. So with the 2 gyms, that really expands the opportunity to keep that safety in mind. And then when we look at the overall enrollment numbers, those numbers have been trending down. And so we have more facility to be able to offer. And we looked at it like you can still offer those electives, much the same as if our Calculus AB and our Calculus BC. It's not uncommon for 2 kids, one in the AB and one a BC, to be in the same class with the same teacher based on the way the schedule gets crafted. 6 of them are doing AB and 7 of them are doing BC. So it doesn't really eliminate the opportunities that they would have. Is that helpful?
Yes.
So if next year the kids get all excited about the 2 gyms and all of those electives, and we need some more, you're going to put it back in the budget?
If the numbers support it, then I will be right back here to be able to clamor for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Was that both questions, Pat? Okay. Jason?
Yeah, I was wondering, we're looking at everything at a cost center standpoint, but is there anything in this book, the budget book, which is huge and beautiful, by the way, that talks about expenses by category? And I'm specifically looking at categories of expenses, non-human related, consumable goods.
We can-
Non-durable?
We can get that for you. There's nothing here now. We can get that for you. The difficulty I find with this budget is it doesn't give you one line for health insurance. It gives you 20 lines for health insurance. And it's just the way the budget's been structured over time in the software. In another year or two, when we transition to a new software package, I think we can change that so you can get a better look at the budget by that object code.
No, thank you. And the reason I say this is, it's, I will first of all say that the city council is very impressed with the budget on Monday. I'm impressed with the budget so far. It's compared to a lot of other municipalities, and I don't like comparing, but we're doing very well, especially when you do peel off the debt service with the local, voter-approved local share. So, but I also think that, in any organization, regardless of how profitable you are, there's always those pennies that are left on the floor that nobody thinks about. And whenever you go through that exercise every 2 to 4 years of finding where those pennies are, i.e. software packages that might not be needed that are paid on a reoccurring monthly on a per pupil basis, or additional reams of paper, or what are the cost savings that individuals can control within the school department that we haven't thought of, or maybe they haven't thought of, but they could bring forward. Now, if we could cut 5 or 6% on that consumable line item, the non-durable goods, if you would, expenditures annually, what would that mean to our budget? It may seem like pennies, but it might mean $150,000, which is 5 cents on the mill rate decrease, which is substantial. And I will say, I don't think we have an average house in Auburn that's worth $150,000. So when we're looking at, when I first became mayor, we used to use $100,000 mark. It's more like $200,000 at a minimum. So we should apply that mill rate to that in order to get a truer number. But can we look at that? Can we explore that and see where we're starting to save pennies?
Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, if I could just, first of all, I think we should be able to give you what you're asking for. It's unfortunate we can't. In the districts I've come from, I've always been able to provide a 2-page summary of the budget based on object code, and we just can't do that here with our software. Having said that, I know Dr. Brown spends a lot of time in the budget process, as our principals and directors behind us will attest to, going line by line through their budgets for justification, whether it's facilities or school. So we don't work on a formula basis. We don't automatically assume an increase for the coming year. In some cases, you actually have schools where their allocations are going down because they haven't fully spent in the last couple of years, so they've readjusted. So we do take a close look at that. The concern you will see, and we talked a little bit about this in the last Finance Committee meeting, is there are some areas where the cost of supplies is literally skyrocketing. One of them we're seeing is in custodial supplies, just because paper is up so high. And some of that's inflation, some of that's the fact that it went down for a while with the pandemic and now it's back up. But we do look at, we spend more than 20% of our time talking about 20% of the budget, realistically, I think. For that reason, we don't want to leave any stone unturned.
I'd love to see those numbers. And, in addition, maybe this is a Finance Committee agenda item.
Okay.
But look at some of the contracts for suppliers, third-party suppliers, when they were last negotiated, what their price point, their escalations are, and do we have to put these out to bid again?
I'll add it to the next Finance Committee agenda.
And last question, I promise.
Sure. Yeah, no, go ahead.
What was your estimate for health insurance? 15%, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Any news, and when do we expect news?
April 7, April 7, which is that first Friday in April.
Any idea? Any guesstimate? The 15% still holds true?
Yeah, only that I guessed too low last year and needed to back up when the numbers actually came in.
So we'll know on April 7th. Okay, very good. Thanks.
All right, anyone questions, Pam? Or comments?
So I wasn't able to make the meeting where we talked about the athletics. So I have a couple questions here that I just wanted to ask. First, this is kind of a basic question, but what's the difference between JV and freshman baseball and freshman football? And why was there ever a need for both originally? I guess is one of my questions.
Todd, if you want to come on up, please. And Pam, did you get the counts? Okay, so you have that to refer to. Okay, good.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. What's the difference between JV and freshman baseball and freshman football? And why is there a need for both? Why was there ever a need for both? Because when I went to high school, there was no freshman, anything. It was just JV and varsity. So I guess I'm a little confused,
Yeah,
even though my
so-
kids did it.
So traditionally, for years on end, there was, across the board with multiple sports, there were freshman JV and varsity teams. And that goes back to historical here in Auburn when Walton School was just freshmen. So Walton was a freshman standalone school, and all of their teams were freshmen only. But now, as things have developed and more sports have come on board, very few sports have continued on having a freshman or a first team along with the JV. Did that answer your question?
Was it, so having both, that explains it with the Walton School, I appreciate that. Having both, though, does that allow more students to have more playtime? Is that like why it was continued?
Correct. It was based solely on numbers. Whether it was football or baseball that you've asked about is really a formula of, you have 9 baseball players on a team, you usually have a roster between 15 and 17. So we kind of looked in that number of, do you have 45 to 50 baseball players, 9 through 12, that would want to participate, so that you could field those 3 separate teams. But over time, and the numbers, and it's across the state, very few. We're having trouble this spring finding some teams to play JV sports against. So for us this season to find first team in freshman baseball games, you really have to go deep into the South. Biddeford, Saco, Scarborough, some of those schools are the only ones left that are offering 3 sports in that sport per gender.
If you cut the freshman team, would the JV team still have, I guess, would it have too much where they weren't getting any playtime, or would they still be able to have an adequate amount of playtime if it was just JV?
We're right on that bubble of not having enough for 3 true teams and probably 2 full rosters. For instance, I'll use baseball. Last year, we finished the season with 34 baseball players, 17 on each team, roughly. But it was nice to have that freshman or first team stipend and team last year so that some of those younger kids that were still working on basic fundamentals could get into a competitive game situation and play. But realistically, two teams of 17 are good rosters. You have 9 on a field at a time. Playing time is always an issue in athletics. So yes, if there were just a varsity and JV, I'm sure there will be more concerns about playing time.
Also, I have a couple other questions
keep
about
going.
sports, sorry.
Yeah, keep going.
So the winter cheering has 11 participants and the fall cheering has 15 participants. Are there overlapping individuals who do both winter and fall cheering?
I would say probably 90% of our fall cheerleaders cheer in the winter.
Okay, so, all right, so why aren't they combined? Why isn't it just cheering? Why is it fall cheering and winter cheering?
Well, it's just 2 different, the MPA has 3 sports seasons, the fall, winter, and spring. Fall cheering is basically a support spirit group, and they do a great job at Walton Field at our football games and supporting the football team, whether it's banners, whether it's halftime routines. The winter competition cheering is sponsored by the MPA. They actually go to conference championships at the Augusta Civic Center. They have a regional championship, which kudos to our team this year. This is the first time they made the state competition in a number of years. But they're both called cheering, but they're very different. The winter cheering is very routine oriented. There's a lot of tumbling. There's a lot of stunts. There's a lot of it's intense. The winter program is intense.
So what would it take to make the fall cheering into a pep club?
Well, we have all kinds of clubs at Edward Little High School, and I just got an email today from another staff member asking about starting another club. all it really takes is student interest and an adult chaperone supervisor to take the lead. We have a snowboarding club that goes out. We have a very robust chess club. So if there was somebody that was willing to have a pep club and be an advisor and donate their time, volunteer their time, then it's we want our kids involved in many things as possible.
Sorry, has there been an interest in that as far as an adult? Could it be a parent? Does it have to be a teacher?
Well, I think that, I believe Pat suggested that last time, that we really haven't got to the point of, if this were to stay, that there wasn't going to be a stipend for fall cheering. We haven't really got to the point of, hey, would anybody be willing to take this over? I'm assuming there would be, but I don't want to go out on that limb quite yet.
One more question.
Sure.
Sorry. Has there not been freshman baseball and freshman football participants in the last 2 years? Only because I asked that because according to these papers, there's no numbers on there. So I was just curious about that.
In the questions that are in front of you, we did update them to include a response to that, but it's Todd's response, so I'll let him provide a
Sure.
response.
So freshman football numbers, freshman football and freshman baseball are really two different pieces when you talk about participation numbers, because when you're talking about football, it's a collision sport, and you really need a solid number. So since the year of COVID, we have not played any freshman football games. Any student athlete, male or female, that wanted to participate in football has played varsity and JV, and because our numbers have been a little light, I know 38 and 47 sounds like a lot, but when you start to talk about 11 on offense, 11 on defense, 11 on special teams, there were some JV games where we were only sending 18 or 19 kiddos. So football, those kids had plenty of playing time, and we did not have any freshman football games the last 2 years. Baseball, as I mentioned, a year ago there was 43 by my math, and once again that was full varsity schedule, full JV schedule, and probably 10 to 12 freshman games. And then last year the 17 and 17 freshman JV, they're mostly the freshmen and the sophomores, maybe a few juniors are sprinkled in. But when the end of season paperwork was turned in, all 34 students were on the same end of season, and they had one large banquet. So nobody was designated. I think we only had 8 or 9 true freshmen, and I mean, you need 9 players, so they were all kind of consumed in that JV number.
I guess my concern with this, I know nobody wants to cut. I mean, these are always hard. The budget is hard. Cutting is hard. I guess my concern is we are going to a bigger school. There's going to be a lot more opportunity to do more. We have 2 gyms, as Mr. Anir said. There's going to be 2 gyms now. We're going to have a state-of-the-art football field. We're going to have baseball fields. We're going to have tennis. There's just going to be these things, and I feel like if I was a student, I'd be like, hey, maybe I will try out for this,
Absolutely.
And if we limit the opportunities to do that, even if you're not the best player, but, and personally, I feel like you should play whether you're the best or not. If it's something you love to do, then go out and do it.
Right.
And having that opportunity to do that is wonderful. And I'm just concerned that we're taking away some of those opportunities. And also, as we all know with budgets, once you take something out, it's a lot easier to take it out than it is to put it back in. And so I guess my concern is, will this ever be put back in? And that's a concern I have.
If I could, if we're having a committee discussion, you had a question too, but real quick, we're avoiding the bigger question. We don't have enough kids. Demographics is destiny. We had 1,900 deaths in Auburn last year and 331 births. So unless we get more kids and grow our city, We're just cutting the pie in smaller and smaller slices. I mean, part of me is, it's great to have a bigger high school, a lot more opportunities, but unless we have kids in the high school, we're not maximizing its fullest potential. And I think that's what, this is the reality. We're talking about $36,000 out of a $51 million budget. It's pennies, not even pennies. But the fact is, we just don't have the kids to do most of these sports safely or effectively. So, where it's sad, I think what we need to do is look at this as a cautionary note, because we are running on thin ice demographically, and if we don't fix this, this is going to happen every single year.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I'm going to chime in with my 2 cents. As far as this, my thoughts on this entire budget are simply that I agree with the mayor. This budget sits well with me. I feel that as someone who has to make these tough decisions for taxpayers, that this is a budget that I can stand behind. What I would say is that our numbers for insurance come back at a number that is actually lower than anticipated, than the 15% increase, then I would look at what we're not talking about. We're spending some time talking about sports, and I understand that is as a parent of 2 kiddos who played sports, I'm also looking at the fact that I would like to see an opportunity to add back in whatever support systems we can add into the schools through ed techs. That would be my first spot that if we are able to add anything back in, I would look to ed techs first. So that's sort of my support systems in the schools. So it's kind of.
I have a question before Todd leaves.
Sure.
Don't go anywhere yet. So in terms of, just back to the first team discussion,
Yes.
What other sports have first teams besides football and baseball currently?
After these proposals, the only sport that would still have a first team or a freshman team would be boys basketball. This winter, we had 54 sign up for basketball, and even with 3 teams, and you only have 5 players on a court. Traditionally, the magic number's 12 or 13. We still ended up, cutting over a dozen students. So if we're looking at strictly participation numbers, boys basketball was the only sport that would have a first team next year.
Brian?
Yeah, just some comments. First, I think kudos to your staff and yourself. I think this is a fantastic budget. I think this is it's several that I've been through. You look back at the message, it clearly articulates what the goals are, and that's student achievement. I sat in Monday's meeting. The city council seemed very pleased. When we break it down, and we're talking about 1.7% increase, which is pretty phenomenal. Like you, Karen, and I'm a huge sports advocate. I think it would be very financially irresponsible if we put that back in. And it's not because I don't think the kids need an opportunity, because we are providing many, many opportunities. But when we're looking at 23.5 cuts, and Mr. Neer sitting here requesting a position, I agree with you, Karen. If we're looking at putting anything back in, it should be those types of things, those support systems. If these come back around, then we need a first team, then I think we look at it then. But I just think it would be very irresponsible to add that back in and look at somebody and say, well, we can't hire ed techs because we have 4 kids on these couple teams. So, but overall, I think it's a great budget. Again, I think it's in line with our goals, and you have my support.
Thank you.
Dan, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good budget. I wouldn't mind adding that back in, but I would like to take more out of the fund balance, probably $1 million more, and drop that down a little bit more. But that's where I would want to be. So that would still leave us plenty in the fund balance. Because we get quite a bit in there, more than I think we've ever had, and I just think it would be well spent. And if the program maybe doesn't work out next year, then we can cut it then. But going into new high school, that I think there may be more interest possibly, and yeah, that's kind of where I stand.
All right, Dan? Trying to see, has everyone had a chance to kind of chime in so far? I think so.
One
Yeah,
comment.
yeah.
Just to
on,
remind
Pam.
everyone that we have 25 positions sitting in ESSER right now, and that ESSER funding is going to end in September of '24. So when we're sitting here next year having this conversation, and Mark and I are very much sort of long vision people, because we're not looking only at 23, 24, we're looking at 24, 25, and 25, 26. And as we have pointed out, I hope correctly, that the general purpose aid figures are going to continue to drop. That's my prediction as of today, and not insignificantly, we're talking millions. And I think that you want to jealously guard your fund balance so that you can protect not just 23, 24, but 24, 25, and 25, 26. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam?
I just have some general comments. I appreciate the thoughtfulness and preparation that went into the budget. I always appreciate the thoroughness and the clarity that's provided in these discussions. I think they're very well done. Generally, just big picture, I do have concerns about losing over 20 teaching and support positions. That's never something that I think you want to be in the position of doing. I do understand the challenges that we've had in trying to fill those vacancies this year, so I can understand that those are places that are easy to cut. I do have concerns that our teaching staff has been operating at max capacity the last couple of years, though, and I worry about how much longer they can sustain that without additional support. I do have some concerns about some of the larger class sizes in some of the elementary schools where teachers got moved to AMS, and we have some bubble classes. I do have some of the concerns about sports, but I do think that some of those have been discussed. The football team, it was clear they didn't even play a first-year schedule this past year. The skiers are still going to have an opportunity to ski. I would love to see the fall cheering be turned into a club so that can continue. If the fun, again, I would agree with if the health insurance estimate comes back less, I would be interested in adding back some of those support positions. The one position that I am opposed to cutting trying to fill is the substance use counselor, though, at the high school. Just in the discussions with the Health and Safety Committee, it's very apparent that that's a very needed position. There have been challenges in trying to fill it. I understand that, but I would hate to see it be removed and us not continue to try to fill it, because with the needs and the larger needs of our EL community, I think that is a very important position and need beyond what the social workers can provide.
So if that were positioned, Dr. Brown, that come October, Mr. Anier comes and says, we absolutely need to add this position back in, could that be then a discussion for the school committee to have to motion that position back in?
Absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
a budget is not a static document. And whether it's a burgeoning enrollment in kindergarten and we need to address it with a classroom teacher, or we need to address a special education out-of-district placement issue, budgets are not fixed. And so we are relatively nimble when it comes to addressing needs that present themselves. I would not be comfortable taking this position out if we did not have the B Street Clinic in the high school and providing those services to kids. We've had a very, very difficult time trying to fill it over the last 2 years. And it's one of those unique positions where you often have private providers looking at the position, thinking of what the salary should be, and it doesn't work out that way, because they end up on a step because they usually don't have a lot of experience, and then we just can't pay them what they think the position is worth.
Karen?
Yes.
Could I propose that we have the public hearing on April 12th, which is a little later than what our initial schedule is?
You want to wait for the health insurance?
Yeah, I think so, because I think that can continuation into the conversations that's happening on the board, but it'll also give us kind of an idea instead of just purely hypothetical. But then whatever is approved, we have a meeting on the 17th for the city council.
Council.
I can do my straw vote, at least get an idea before we go up to the full formal vote, so we can give you some talking points or guidance post that city council meeting.
think
If
it's
that
a-
makes sense to the superintendent and
It's a great
everybody.
idea.
I do. I would think that's a good idea, only because it would solidify some of the questions that we have in our minds, or so just provide a little bit more clarity. So I would agree with that. Anyone want to chime in on that conversation? Jump in? Okay. All right, so let's do that. So I want to wrap up this conversation simply by just saying thank you again. Oh, sorry, Pat, were you jumping in? You good? Okay. So thank you again to you and your staff for all of this. Oh, sorry, Brian.
Sorry, I just pulled up the agenda. So, on the 5th, we have our normal meeting, and the public hearing is here. Are we going to host a special meeting on the 12th? Because we don't have a normal meeting on the 12th.
That would be my understanding.
Okay.
That would be mine. That's the way I took it. Okay. Sure.
I do want to thank all of you who, Dr. Brown, Mr. Conrad, for doing this budget. This is not an easy budget to do, obviously. I don't even like doing my home budget, so let alone a $55 million budget. And I appreciate, one thing that I do appreciate, as hard as it is to cut these positions and to cut out of the budget, I do appreciate the care and the research and the understanding that you put into these when you say that, well, I wouldn't cut this position if I didn't know that such and such could help. Or, as far as like the cheering, that we know that maybe we can make it into a pep club. You not only make the tough decisions, but you've also created an opportunity to maybe offer something else. And I appreciate that, because I think all of us really, have a really hard time making any cuts in the budgets, especially because we know it's the hard times, and we know that the teachers are working hard, the staff is working hard, and we don't want to take anything away from them to make their job even harder. So I just appreciate the thought that you've put into that, and all the skill. Mark, sometimes it's over my head. So I really appreciate that. I agree with the substance abuse position. I do wish that we could find a place for that. But I do appreciate hearing that, because the budget is nimble, that maybe if the opportunity presents itself and that someone is available to do that position, is willing to take the pay that we offer them, that it would be there. Because I do think that there's a lot going on in our society, and I think that substance abuse is really one of those things that is on the rise. And I think that having someone there to just specifically deal with that would be wonderful. But I understand why we don't. So I just want to thank you all for the hard work, and the administrators for all the work that you've put into this. It's not an easy thing, and it's a teamwork effort, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. So overall, I'm hearing a few concerns here and there, but overall support from the school committee on budget, I believe, with perhaps a few little tweaks here and there. Pat?
I appreciate your remark about the ed techs, and I think Pam supported that with her concern for the teachers and what they're running around doing. So if we were to do a hierarchy of the most important things to add back in, I think that should be the first one, and the substance abuse is second one.
Thank you. All right, I think that wraps up our budget conversation. School committee members, thank you all. We have upcoming meetings are listed here, so please add April 12th to your list of meetings. And with that, future agenda items and requests for information. I think we had a request for information for what are the health insurance rate coming in at. Any others? All right, seeing none, I'm going to call for a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A for the purpose of investigation of complaints against a person of persons. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. So Pam, thank you. Brian, all those in favor? All right, we are now in executive session. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.